Her laugh cut through the jazz like a rusty blade against concrete. Charity cases eat last. Elena sneered at my plate. My son, Marcus, just looked away, turning my 65-year-old heart colder than winter steel. They think I am a useless retiree living on their pity. They do not know this skyscraper, this party, and my son's CEO title hang by a single thread, my signature. And tonight, the ink is finally drying. My name is Robert Smith, and if you looked at me standing in the shadow of the portico, you would never guess that the steel skeleton holding this entire hotel together was drawn by my hand 40 years ago. The valet looked at my truck like it was a contagious disease. It was a Ford F-150, 1998 model, with a dent on the rear bumper from when a pallet of rebar swung too wide on a site in Chicago. It was clean. I had washed it myself that morning with a bucket and a hose in the driveway of my apartment complex. But compared to the parade of Bentleys, McLarens, and Mercedes G-Wagons idling in the circular driveway, my truck looked like a piece of debris that had fallen off a construction truck. The boy in the red vest hesitated. I rolled down the window. The air conditioning in my truck had given up the ghost 3 summers ago, so the cabin was thick with the smell of old upholstery and the faint, permanent scent of diesel. "Keep it close, son," I said, handing him a $10 bill. "The transmission sticks in reverse if you do not finesse it." The boy took the money, his eyes flicking to the lineup of supercars behind me. He gave me a look that was not quite pity, but close enough to it. He probably thought I was a contractor coming to fix a leaky pipe in the kitchen, not the guest of honor's father. I stepped out onto the pavement. My knees popped. 65 years of climbing scaffolding and jumping into muddy trenches had left my joints feeling like rusted hinges that needed oiling. I adjusted my jacket. It was a charcoal wool suit I had bought at a department store 15 years ago. It was thick, durable, and completely out of place in the humid summer evening. It was cut boxy, meant for a man who needed room to move his shoulders, not for a man who spent his days sipping espresso in air-conditioned boardrooms. Around me, men half my age strutted in slim-fit Italian suits that cost more than my first 3 cars combined. Their fabrics shimmied under the hotel lights, silk and cashmere blends that would tear if they ever snagged on a nail. I walked toward the entrance of the Grand Riverfront Hotel. Above the double doors, a massive banner snapped in the wind. 40 years of iron core dynamics building the future. The font was sleek, modern, sans serif. It looked nothing like the blocky, sturdy letters I had hand-painted on the sign of our first workshop. That sign was gone now, probably rotting in a landfill somewhere, much like the values Sarah and I had built this company on. Inside, the ballroom was an assault on the senses. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, fracturing the light into a million blinding prisms. The air was cold, aggressively conditioned, and smelled of expensive perfume and ozone. A jazz band played in the corner, a saxophone weeping out a melody that nobody was listening to. I navigated through the crowd. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. Nobody looked at me. Their eyes slid over my gray hair and my broad, unfashionable tie, dismissing me as irrelevant. They were too busy scanning the room for someone important, someone who could further their careers or boost their portfolios. I caught snippets of conversation as I passed. Market capitalization is up 8% this quarter. The acquisition of the waterfront property is a game changer. Marcus is a visionary, a true disruptor. I almost snorted aloud. A disruptor, my son, Marcus, had never disrupted anything in his life except my bank account. He was standing near the center of the room, under the largest chandelier, holding court. He looked the part of the modern CEO. His suit was midnight blue, tailored to within an inch of its life. His hair was styled with just the right amount of product to look effortlessly perfect. He was laughing at something a venture capitalist was saying, his head thrown back, his teeth gleaming white. Beside him stood Elena, my daughter-in-law, the director of branding. She was wearing a silver dress that looked like it was made of liquid mercury. It clung to her, sharp and dangerous. Her eyes were scanning the room with the precision of a laser level, assessing the value of every person in her line of sight. When her gaze swept past me, it did not even pause. I was part of the background noise, static on the radio. My stomach growled, a low rumble that reminded me I had not eaten since breakfast. I had spent the last 8 hours at the vocational school in the South District, teaching a group of 18-year-olds how to properly weld a T-joint without compromising the structural integrity of the steel. It was unpaid work, volunteer work, but it was the only time in my week where I felt real. The heat of the torch, the smell of melting metal, the focus in the eyes of those kids who knew that learning this trade was their ticket out of poverty that was real. This ballroom, with its ice sculptures and gold leaf napkins, was an illusion. I made my way toward the buffet. It was an excessive display. Mounds of shrimp on ice, oysters shucked and glistening, towers of macarons, and cuts of prime rib that looked like they had been sliced by a surgeon. I picked up a plate. It was heavy porcelain, rimmed in gold. I just wanted some roast beef and maybe a roll. My hands were still slightly stained with grease that the lava soap at the shop could not quite scrub out. I liked the reminder. It kept me grounded. I reached for the serving tongs. Well, look who decided to show up. The voice was low, but it carried a frequency that grated on my nerves. I paused, the tongs hovering over a slice of rare beef. I turned slowly. Elena was standing there, up close. She smelled of lilies and cold ambition. She was holding a flute of champagne, her fingers manicured into sharp, red points. She was not smiling. Or rather, her mouth was curved upward, but her eyes were dead. "Hello, Elena," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Happy anniversary." She looked at my plate, then at my suit, then back at my face. Her expression was one of mild disgust, like she had found a hair in her soup. "We did not think you would come. Robert," she said. "Marcus said you were busy with your hobby." "It is not a hobby, Elena. I am teaching kids how to build things. Something this family used to know how to do." She laughed then. It was a light, tinkling sound, utterly devoid of humor. She took a step closer, blocking my path to the food around us. A few guests turned their heads. I recognized the vice president of logistics and a couple of board members. They were watching, their faces masks of polite curiosity. "You are adorable, Robert," she said, loud enough for the circle of people to hear, playing the blue-collar hero. "But look at you. You are out of place. This is a celebration of the future. You are, well, you are the past." I tightened my grip on the plate. "I am the founder, Elena." She rolled her eyes, a theatrical gesture meant for her audience. "You are a liability. Look at this suit. You look like you just crawled out of a sewer. Honestly, it is embarrassing for Marcus. He is trying to close deals tonight. He does not need his father wandering around looking like a beggar." I felt the heat rise in my neck. It was not a shame. It was the heat of a boiler reaching critical pressure. "I am just getting some dinner, Elena. Then I will get out of your way." I moved to step around her. She shifted, blocking me again. The smile vanished. Her face became hard, the mask slipping for just a second. "No," she said. Her voice was nice. "You do not get to come in here, eat our food, drink our wine, and pretend you belong. This food is for the people who are building this company, the people who matter." I looked at her, truly looked at her. I saw the fear behind the arrogance. She was terrified that someone might remember who actually built Iron Core. She needed to erase me to validate herself. "I am hungry, Elena," I said quietly. And then she said it. She looked straight at me, lifted her chin, and announced to the room, "Charity cases eat last. Robert, you know the rules." The silence that followed lasted only a second, but it felt like an hour. Then, someone giggled. It was a nervous sound at first, but it broke the tension. A man in a velvet tuxedo chuckled. A woman behind him covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. The laughter rippled outward, small waves of amusement at the old man being put in his place by the sharp, modern woman. Charity cases. The words hung in the air between us. My hands. The hands that had laid the first brick of the first factory. The hands that had signed the incorporation papers on a kitchen table while Sarah held our newborn son, were shaking. Not from fear. From a rage so cold it burned. I looked past Elena. I looked for him. Marcus was 15 feet away. He had heard. There was no way he could not have heard. He was holding a scotch, the amber liquid tilting in the glass. He looked up, and our eyes locked, for one heartbeat. I saw the boy I used to carry on my shoulders to inspect the sights. I saw the teenager I had taught to drive in that old Ford truck. I waited for him to step forward. I waited for him to tell his wife that she was speaking to his father, the man who had given him everything. I waited for the loyalty that I had instilled in him, the code of honor that says you protect your own. Marcus looked at me. He saw the laughter of the investors. He saw the sneer on his wife's face. He saw my old suit and my grease-stained hands. And then, he turned his back. He adjusted his cufflink, a small, fussy motion, and leaned in to say something to the man next to him. He laughed. A fake, boisterous laugh that signaled to everyone in the room that he was unbothered, that the old man at the buffet was nothing to him. That was the moment. It was not a crack. It was not a snap. It was a shift. Deep in the bedrock of my soul, something fundamental gave way. It was the feeling you get when you are inspecting a bridge, and you see a hairline fracture in a primary load-bearing beam. You do not scream. You do not panic. You just know. You know that the structure is compromised. You know that it is no longer safe. You know that it has to come down before it kills someone. I did not feel sad. Sadness is for things that can be fixed. This was beyond repair. The family I thought I had, the legacy I thought I was leaving, it was all rot. It was a facade of marble over a core of styrofoam. The laughter around me was still trickling on, a background track to my revelation. Elena was watching me, waiting for me to explode or to beg. She wanted a reaction. She wanted to see the old man crumble so she could feel tall. I looked down at the empty plate in my hand. The gold rim caught the light. It was beautiful and useless. I took a breath. I smelled the roast beef, the expensive perfume, and the rot. I did not say a word. I did not frown. I simply leaned forward and set the plate down on the granite countertop. Clack. The sound was sharp. It cut through the giggles. It was the sound of a judge's gavel. It was the sound of a lock clicking shut. I turned around. I did not look at Elena. I did not look at Marcus's back. I walked through the crowd. The sea of tuxedos and gowns parted for me, not out of respect, but out of awkwardness. They did not want to touch the charity case. As I walked toward the exit, my mind began to clear. The emotional fog dissipated, replaced by the cold, hard logic of an engineer. When a building is condemned, you do not just swing a wrecking ball at it. That is messy. That is dangerous. No. You plan. You study the blueprints. You identify the key structural points. You drill holes in the columns. You place the charges. You sever the connections one by one. I walked past the banner that said, "Building the Future." You do not build the future on a rotten foundation, I thought. You clear the site. You strip it down to the dirt. The valet saw me coming. He looked surprised that I was leaving so soon. He ran to get my truck. As I stood there in the humid night air, listening to the hum of the city, I started to draft the plan in my head. I thought about the files in my safe. I thought about the clauses in the contracts that Marcus had never bothered to read. I thought about the sheer weight of the secrets I carried. They thought I was eating last. They thought I was waiting for scraps. The truck pulled up, its engine rattling with a familiar, comforting rhythm. I tipped the boy another $10. "Have a good night, sir," he said. I climbed into the cab. The vinyl seat was hot against my back. I put the truck in gear, finessing the stick just right so it would not catch. "I am going to have a very interesting night, son," I whispered to the empty cab. I pulled away from the curb, leaving the lights and the music and the laughter behind me. I did not look back at the hotel. I did not need to. I knew exactly how it looked, and I knew exactly how it would look when the dust settled. The demolition had begun, and they did not even know the fuse was lit. The drive back to my apartment took 45 minutes, but it felt like I was traveling back in time. As the city skyline shrank in my rearview mirror, the smooth, freshly paved highways of the financial district gave way to the cracked asphalt and potholed roads of the industrial outskirts. My suspension creaked in protest, a rhythmic groaning that matched the ache in my lower back. I pulled into the complex where I had lived for the last 6 months. It was a cluster of beige, two-story buildings that looked like they had been designed by someone who hated architecture. The parking lot was gravel and dirt, and as my tires crunched over the loose stones, the sound triggered a memory so sharp it almost made me wince. It was the sound of breaking concrete. It was the sound of the very first demolition job Sarah and I ever took, back when iron core was just 2 people and a rusted pickup truck. I killed the engine and sat in the dark for a moment. The silence here was different from the silence at the hotel. There, the silence was filled with judgment. Here, it was just empty. I climbed the stairs to Unit 2B, the key stuck in the lock, just like it always did. You had to jiggle it to the left, then shove. A simple mechanical failure, easily fixed with a little graphite powder. But I had never bothered. Maybe I liked the struggle. Maybe it reminded me that nothing in this life opens easily. Inside, the apartment smelled of stale coffee and old paper. It was a 1-bedroom box, a kitchenette with a humming refrigerator, a living room with a couch I had bought from a thrift store, and a small desk in the corner. That desk was the command center of my life now. It was where I spent my nights, not sleeping, but watching. But I took off my jacket and hung it on the back of a chair. I loosened my tie. I looked at the photo on the mantel. It was the only thing of value I had brought with me. Sarah, laughing, her face smudged with grease, holding a welding torch like it was a bouquet of flowers. We were standing in front of the frame of the first warehouse we built. We looked tired. We looked hungry. But we looked like kings. Sarah, she was the one who understood the soul of metal. I knew the math, the load limits, the yield points. But Sarah knew how to make the business breathe. She could charm a supplier into giving us steel on credit when we did not have 2 nickels to rub together. She could walk onto a site full of roughnecks and have them listening to her orders within 5 minutes. We built iron core with sweat. Real sweat. Not the moisture you get from a sauna or a gym, but the stinging, salty grime that comes from 14 hours of grinding rivets and pouring foundation slabs. We missed anniversaries. We missed the holidays. We poured every single dollar back into the company. We ate sandwiches from gas stations so we could afford the high-grade rebar. And for what? So my son could stand in a crystal ballroom and let his wife call me a charity case. I walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of tap water. The pipes rattled. 5 years ago. That was when the rot had truly set in. I remembered the meeting in the boardroom, the same boardroom I had designed, with the reinforced floor beams to support the heavy oak table. Marcus had called the meeting. He sat at the head of the table, wearing a suit that cost more than my first house. "Dad," he had said, sliding a folder across the polished wood. "We need to talk about the future." I had opened the folder. It was a retirement plan, a golden parachute, a push out the door. "The industry is changing, Robert," he had said. He stopped calling me Dad halfway through the meeting. It is about agility now. It is about digital integration, smart cities, blockchain logistics. Your methods, they are analog. They are slow. We need to modernize if we want to compete. You are obsolete. Obsolete. The word had hung in the air like toxic dust. I had looked at him. Really looked at him. I saw a man who knew all the buzzwords but none of the physics. He thought building a company was about branding and perception. He did not understand that if the foundation is weak, the prettiest facade in the world will just be a heavier pile of rubble when it collapses. But I was tired. Sarah had been gone for 2 years then, without her. The fight had drained out of me. I thought, maybe he is right. Maybe I am too old. Maybe it is his turn. So I signed. I stepped down. I became the chairman emeritus, a fancy title for a ghost. But I did not stop watching. 6 months after I retired, the truth came out. It was not about modernization. It was about solvency. Marcus had leveraged the company to the hilt. He had invested millions of company funds into speculative real estate ventures in the metaverse and high-risk tech startups that evaporated overnight. Ironcore was bleeding out. The banks were calling in loans. The suppliers were threatening to put liens on our equipment. He came to me then, panic in his eyes. Begging for help? No. He never begged. He just hid it. He cooked the books. He moved numbers around to make the bleeding look like growth. But I knew. I still had friends in accounting. Old-timers who remembered who signed their first paychecks. They sent me the real ledgers. Ironcore was 2 weeks away from total collapse. Chapter 11. Bankruptcy. The liquidation of everything Sarah and I had built. I could have let him fail. God knows he deserved it. But I could not let the name Ironcore die. I could not let the 300 families who depended on our paychecks lose their livelihoods because my son was an incompetent gambler. So I did the only thing I could do. I sold my masterpiece. For 10 years. I had been working on a new design in my private workshop. A hydraulic load-bearing system for skyscraper dampeners. It was revolutionary. It used a specific viscosity of fluid dynamics to counter wind sway in super tall structures more efficiently than anything on the market. It was my legacy. It was the culmination of 40 years of engineering genius. I sold the patent to a German conglomerate. I did it quietly. I did not put my name on the press release. I used a shell company. I got $60 million for a technology that was worth 10 times that. I took that money and I did not give it to Marcus. I knew he would just burn it. Instead, I formed Titan Surety Group. In the construction world, you cannot dig a hole or erect a beam without a surety bond. It is insurance. It guarantees that if the contractor fails, the bonder will step in and finish the job or pay the damages. When Ironcore's credit rating tanked, no reputable surety company would touch them. They were radioactive. Enter Titan Surety, an unknown firm with massive liquidity, appearing out of nowhere. We meaning me and my attorney. Victor Hale offered to bond Ironcore's projects when no one else would. We charged high premiums. We demanded strict oversight clauses. Marcus signed the deal with Titan Surety without even looking at who owned it. He was just relieved to have a lifeline. He thought he had fooled the system. He thought Titan was just some hungry new player taking a risk. He had no idea that the chairman of Titan Surety was sitting in a one-bedroom apartment, eating canned soup, and reviewing every single progress report his company filed. I was not just his father anymore. I was his bank. I was his safety net. And I was the noose around his neck, waiting for the moment to tighten. My phone buzzed on the counter, vibrating against the laminate. I picked it up. A text from Marcus. Dad. Are you home yet? Look. Do not let Elena's comments get to you. She had too much champagne. She is under a lot of stress with the rebranding. I stared at the screen. Stress. Rebranding. As if those were excuses for treating a human being like garbage. Then, a second text bubbled up. By the way, The lawyers need that signature on Mom's old land deed, the parcel in Oregon. We can use it as collateral for the expansion loan. Let me know when I can send a courier." I felt a vein throb in my temple. That land in Oregon was where Sarah wanted to build a cabin. It was sacred ground. And he wanted to mortgage it. He wanted to throw it into the furnace of his ambition, just like he had thrown everything else. I did not reply. I turned off the phone and tossed it onto the couch. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. It was a high-performance machine. The only modern luxury I allowed myself. I launched the secure VPN and logged into the Titan Surety mainframe. The screen is filled with data streams. Green numbers for safe projects, yellow for delayed ones, red for critical risks. I navigated to the file for Project Alpha 9. The public name was the Skyline Bridge. It was the crown jewel of Marcus's new vision, a suspension bridge connecting the revitalized docklands to the main city peninsula. $500 million, a massive undertaking. It was supposed to be the project that put Iron Core back on the map globally. Titan Surety was bonding the entire project. If that bridge failed, Titan would be on the hook for $500 million. But if Iron Core defaulted or violated the contract, Titan had the right to seize assets, all assets. I pulled up the material procurement logs. My eyes scanned the rows of data, concrete density reports, soil compaction tests, rivet shear ratings. Everything looked normal on the surface. The paperwork was pristine, too pristine. I clicked on the steel shipment manifest for the main suspension pylons. According to the contract, the pylons required grade 50 steel, specifically American Standard A, 572. This is high-strength, low-alloy structural steel. It is the backbone of modern infrastructure. It has a minimum yield strength of 50,000 pounds per square inch. It bends before it breaks. It gives you a warning. The manifest listed the supplier as Global Metals Limited, a distributor based in a free trade zone in the Pacific. That raised a flag. Iron Core usually bought direct from mills in Pennsylvania or Ohio. I drilled deeper. I cross-referenced the lot numbers on the shipping containers with the mill test reports uploaded to the server. The mill test report said a 572. The chemical composition listed the correct percentages of carbon, columbium, and vanadium. But then I looked at the timestamps on the digital certificates. The mill test reports were dated 3 days after the steel had supposedly left the port of origin. That was impossible. You test the steel before you ship it. You do not ship it and then hope it passes. I opened a separate window and ran a trace on the lot numbers through an international material database, a tool I had access to thanks to my old engineering certifications. The database spun for a few seconds, then pinged. Lot number 4, 920 Alpha. Origin A, decommissioned mill in Southeast Asia. Material classification, re-rolled scrap. Grade equivalent, A36 at best. Often unrated. My breath hitched in my throat. A 3.6 is standard carbon steel. It is fine for walkways or decorative beams. It has a yield strength of 36,000 pounds per square inch. If you use A36 where the engineering calls for A572, you are losing nearly 30% of your load-bearing capacity on a bridge. 30% is the difference between standing tall in a storm and snapping like a dry twig. Marcus was swapping the steel. He was buying cheap, unrated scrap metal, polishing it up, forging the paperwork, and burying it in the concrete pylons of a public bridge. He was saving maybe $2 million on materials pocket change in a project this size, but he was risking thousands of lives. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking. My hands were trembling, but not from rage this time, from horror. This was not just financial incompetence. This was criminal negligence. This was manslaughter waiting to happen. He had crossed the line. He had broken the one sacred rule of our trade. You can cheat on your taxes. You can lie to your investors. You can cut corners on the landscaping. But you never, ever cheat on physics. Gravity does not negotiate. Gravity does not take bribes. I looked at the glowing screen. The Skyline Bridge project status was flashing green. On schedule, on budget. I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a bottle of cheap whiskey and a heavy glass. I poured a shot. My hand steady now. Elena thought I was a charity case. Marcus thought I was a senile old man who just needed to sign some papers. They did not know that the man they dismissed was the only person on earth who knew they were building a death trap. I took a sip of the whiskey. It was burning, hot and clean. I picked up the mouse and opened a new email draft. Recipient, Victor Hale. Subject line, Priority 1. I typed 2 sentences. Victor. Initiate Protocol 13 immediately. We are going to audit the Skyline project. And I want full core sampling done by dawn. I hit send. The digital swoosh sound was quiet in the empty apartment. I closed the laptop. The room went dark, save for the streetlight filtering through the blinds. I am not retired, I whispered to the empty room. I am the inspector. And I just found a crack in the foundation that is going to bring the whole house down. The silence in my apartment was heavy, but it was honest. It was not like the silence in the mansion, the one that used to suffocate me before I was exiled. I sat there, the whiskey glass warming in my hand, and let my mind drift back 6 months. I needed to remember the pain. I needed to sharpen it, like a whetstone against a blade, because what I was about to do required an edge that could cut through bone. It happened on a Tuesday morning, the kind of gray, drizzly Seattle morning that seeps into your joints. I had come down to the kitchen of the house. I had built a $5 million estate in the Highlands with vaulted ceilings and cedar beams that I had hand-selected from the mill myself. I was looking for coffee. What I found was an ambush. Elena was sitting at the breakfast island, her hands wrapped around a mug of herbal tea. She was wearing white cashmere. Everything about her was soft, curated, and expensive. Marcus was standing by the window, staring out at the rain, his back to me. That was his favorite position. Back turned, eyes averted. "Robert," Elena said. She did not look up from her tea. "We need to discuss the living arrangements." I stopped. The coffee pot was empty. It usually was, since Sarah died. The house had ceased to function as a home. It was a stage set, and I was a prop that had overstayed its welcome. "What about them?" I asked. "This house," she said, gesturing vaguely at the chef's kitchen that Sarah had loved so much. "It is crowded. The energy is stagnant. Marcus and I are trying to take Iron Core to a new level. We need a space that reflects that. We need a sanctuary." I looked at her. "This house is 6,000 square feet. Elena, there are 3 of us." She sighed, a sound of practiced exhaustion. "It is not about square footage, Robert. It is about vibration. Frankly, having you here, shuffling around with your old stories and your things, it disrupts the flow. We want to convert the East Wing into a wellness suite, a yoga studio, a VIP lounge for entertaining high-level clients. The East Wing. That was where my study was. That was where I kept 40 years of archives. My study is in the East Wing, I said. Exactly, she replied. And it is full of clutter, old papers, dusty models. It smells like a library there. It is depressing. We need that space. I looked at Marcus. He did not turn around. "Marcus," I said. He shifted his weight. "Look, Dad, it is just... maybe it is time you found a place that suits your current lifestyle better. Something smaller, low maintenance. You do not need all this room." It was not a request. It was an eviction notice delivered over a granite countertop I had paid for. I went upstairs to my study. I wanted to salvage what I could. But when I opened the door, the air left my lungs. The room was already being cleared. There were movers there, men in blue uniforms, dumping armfuls of my life into large plastic bins, and standing in the center of the room, directing them, was Elena's personal assistant, "Stop!" I commanded. My voice boomed. The voice of a foreman who catches a worker without a safety harness. The movers froze. But then, Elena walked in behind me. "Keep going," she said to them. Then she turned to me with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "We are just helping you declutter. Robert, you can't take all this junk to a condo." I watched, paralyzed, as one of the movers picked up a stack of large, yellowed sheets from my drafting table. Those were not just papers. They were the original schematics for the heavy lift crane system that had put Iron Core on the map in 1985. I had drawn them by hand, late at night, while Sarah read budget reports next to me. The ink was faded, the corners dog-eared. But every line was a memory. Every measurement was a prayer we had whispered into the void of bankruptcy. "Careful with those," I said, stepping forward. "Those are originals." The mover looked at Elena. She gave a slight nod. "Recycling," she said. "No," I shouted. But the man had already tossed them. I watched the heavy vellum roll through the air and land in a blue bin filled with shredded documents. My life's work, my art, thrown away like yesterday's newspaper because it interfered with a yoga studio. I lunged for the bin, but Elena stepped in front of me. She was small, but her malice gave her weight. "Let it go." "Robert," she hissed, "it is garbage. Nobody builds like that anymore. It is obsolete, just like you." I looked past her, to the doorway. Marcus was standing there. He had followed us up. He was watching his wife throw his father's legacy into the trash. He saw the pain on my face. He saw the way my hands shook as I reached for the bin. "Marcus," I said. My voice was a whisper. "Those are the drawings for the Mark IV crane. You played on the prototype when you were 6. Marcus looked at the bin. Then he looked at Elena. She raised an eyebrow. A silent challenge. "Choose," her eyes said. "Choose the past, or choose me." He looked down at his Italian loafers. "Let her work, Dad," he mumbled. "It is just paper. We have everything digitized anyway." He was lying. We did not have those digitized. They were gone. I stood there for a long moment. I felt a cracking sensation in my chest, distinct and physical. It was the sound of the last structural beam of my patience giving way. I did not fight them. I did not dig through the trash. I walked out of the room. I went to the master bedroom, took the suitcase I had used for business trips since 1990, and packed my clothes. I took the framed photo of Sarah from the nightstand. I walked down the grand staircase of the house that Sarah and I had built with blood and equity. I walked past the living room where we had opened Christmas presents. I walked past the kitchen where we had argued, and made up and laughed. I left the keys on the table near the door. A house worth $5 million. I left it all to them. Why did I not burn it down right then and there because of Sarah? On her deathbed, her skin like parchment. She had squeezed my hand with a grip that was surprisingly strong. "Promise me." "Bob," she had rasped. "Promise me you won't give up on him. He is weak. I know. But he is ours. Give him a chance to grow. Give him the room to be the man we know he can be." I had promised. And for 6 months, I had kept that promise. I had told myself that my departure was the room he needed. I told myself that by stepping aside, by letting them have the house, the title, the glory. I was allowing Marcus to step up. I was letting him find his own footing without his father's shadow, casting darkness over him. I was a fool. I was a sentimental, old fool. I snapped back to the present. The whiskey in my glass was gone. The apartment was dark. I looked at the laptop screen glowing on the desk. I had given him room to grow. And what had he grown? Weeds. Poisonous. Choking weeds. The email from the independent audit system, a backdoor program I had installed in the server architecture years ago, disguised as a disk defragmentation tool, was blinking red. "Subject anomaly detected. Accounts payable." I clicked it open. The spreadsheet filled the screen. It was a list of outgoing wire transfers from the last 18 months. I scrolled down, my eyes scanning the data with the same scrutiny I used to inspect welds. There was a recurring payment, every month, on the 15th, to Lumina Brand Solutions LLC, amount $85,000, memo Strategic Brand, Consulting Synergy Analysis. I had never heard of Lumina Brand Solutions, and I knew every vendor in the city. I opened a second window and ran a search on the company registration. Lumina Brand Solutions, registered agent, a law firm in the Cayman Islands, principal officer hidden behind a privacy trust. But I did not need a registry to know who it was. I looked at the metadata of the invoices attached to the payments. They were clumsy forgeries. The font was standard Helvetica. The logo was a piece of clip art. And the description of services was a word salad of corporate buzzwords that meant absolutely nothing. Holistic vibe curation, market penetration optics. I tracked the IP address that had uploaded the invoices to the Ironcore system. It came from a residential address, 5509 Highland Drive, my old house, specifically. The IP address originated from a device named Elena_iPad_Pro. I closed my eyes and did the math. $85,000 a month. For 18 months. That was $1,530,000. Plus, a signing bonus for the contract, $200,000. Plus, expenses. First-class flights to Milan, Paris, Dubai, hotel suites at the Ritz. Spa treatments are coded as market research. Total misappropriation, over $2 million. Elena was not just insulting me. She was looting the company. She was siphoning liquidity out of Ironcore at a rate that would make a leech blush. She was taking the money that should have gone to buying grade 50 steel, the money that should have gone to paying the workers' pensions, and she was funneling it into her own secret offshore account. And Marcus Guy pulled up the approval logs. Every single invoice bore his digital signature. He knew. He had to know. You do not sign off on an $80,000 check without asking what it is for, unless you are too terrified to ask. I pictured the scene. Elena, threatening to leave him, threatening to take half of his assets, to expose his incompetence, to humiliate him publicly. She held the leash. And Marcus, my son, the CEO of Ironcore, was down on all fours, signing whatever she put in front of him just to keep the peace, just to keep her from walking out the door. I felt a wave of nausea. I had thought my silence was noble. I thought I was being a martyr for my family. I was wrong. My silence was not patience. It was fertilizer. I had watered their greed with my passivity. I had fed the monster with my own dignity, hoping it would eventually get full and stop eating. But monsters do not get full. They just get bigger, by stepping aside. I had not given Marcus room to grow. I had given him room to rot. I looked at Sarah's photo on the desk. Her eyes were kind. But tonight, they looked sad. "I am sorry. Sarah," I whispered. "I kept my promise. I gave him a chance. I gave him everything, and he used it to build a coffin for our legacy." I set the glass down. The sound was a hard thud against the wood. The time for promises was over. The time for protection was gone. I was no longer a father. I was a structural engineer. And when a building is infested with termites, you do not ask the termites to please leave. You do not give the termites more wood in hopes they will be satisfied. You fumigate. I picked up my phone. It was 11:30 at night, but I knew he would answer. I dialed Victor Hale. Victor was the only man in Seattle I trusted. He was a shark in a three-piece suit, a lawyer who knew where every skeleton in the city's construction industry was buried because he had dug half the graves himself. He was also the acting legal counsel for Titan Surety Group. He answered on the second ring. "Robert, is everything all right?" His voice was alert. He knew I never called this late unless a load-bearing wall had just cracked. "I am looking at the internal financials. Victor, I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. And it is worse than the steal, I said. They are gutting the cash flow. Elena is funneling millions into a shell company. Marcus is signing off on it. There was a pause on the line. I heard the rustle of bedsheets, the sound of Victor sitting up and reaching for his glasses. Do you have the proof, he asked. I have the invoices, the IP traces, and the bank routing numbers. It is grand larceny. Victor, it is embezzlement. Okay, Victor said. His tone shifted from friend to attorney. What do you want to do? Do you want to file a police report? No, I said. Not yet. Police take too long. And I do not want this in the papers tomorrow morning. I want to crush them. Victor, I want to squeeze the air out of the room until they understand exactly how small they are. I waited a beat, letting the anger crystallize into a plan. Victor, I said, I want you to activate Clause 13. The line went silent. Clause 13 of the Titan Surety, General Indemnity Agreement. It was the nuclear option. It allowed the surety company to demand an immediate, comprehensive audit of the principal's personal and corporate finances if there was a suspicion of material adverse change. It froze all assets. It locked all accounts. It gave the surety power of attorney over the company's checkbook. Robert, Victor said slowly, if we pull the trigger on Clause 13, it stops everything, payroll, vendor payments. The bridge project halts tomorrow morning. It is a declaration of war. I looked at the invoices on my screen. I looked at the empty space on the wall where my blueprints should have hung. They declared war 6 months ago. Victor, I said, they just didn't think the enemy had any ammunition. Are you sure? Victor asked. Once we start this, there is no going back. This will destroy Marcus. I closed my eyes. I saw the look on Marcus's face at the party, the way he turned his back. He is already destroyed. Victor, he just hasn't hit the ground yet. Do it, I said. Send the notice. I want it on his desk by 8 a.m. Understood, Victor said. I will draft the subpoena now. I hung up. I sat in the dark for a long time. The screensaver on my laptop came on. It was a picture of the first bridge Sarah and I ever built. A small, simple truss bridge over a creek in the countryside. It was strong. It was honest. It was still standing 40 years later. I touched the screen. I am coming for you, I thought. Elena wanted a charity case. She was about to find out what happens when the charity case owns the bank. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the city lights were blurring in the mist. Somewhere out there, in my house, in my bed. Elena was probably sleeping soundly, dreaming of her next shopping trip, dreaming of the yoga studio she would build on the grave of my life's work. Sleep tight. Elena, I whispered, because tomorrow, the wrecking ball arrives. The morning sun hit the glass facade of the Iron Corps headquarters, turning the building into a shimmering monument to my son's vanity. Inside the executive suite on the top floor, I knew exactly what was happening. Marcus and Elena were likely toasting themselves with mimosas, looking down at the city like monarchs surveying a kingdom they had not conquered, but merely inherited. They were celebrating the Skyline Bridge project. To them, it was already a victory. It was magazine covers. It was interviews on business channels. It was a legacy that would finally eclipse mine. They had no idea that 20 miles away, at the muddy, chaotic construction site on the riverbank, a convoy of 3 black SUVs was pulling up to the security gate. I was sitting in my apartment, staring at the live feed from the job site cameras on my laptop. I took a sip of lukewarm coffee. My pulse was steady. This was not vengeance. This was a safety inspection. The SUVs bore the logo of Titan Surety Group on the side panels. It was a logo I had designed myself on a napkin 3 years ago, a stylized shield that looked impenetrable. My lead inspector, a man named Harris who used to be a structural forensic analyst for the Army Corps of Engineers, stepped out of the lead vehicle. He did not smile. He did not shake hands with the site foreman. He simply held up a clipboard and pointed at the massive concrete pylons rising out of the riverbed. I turned up the volume on the audio feed. "We are here for a spot audit," Harris barked. His voice cut through the noise of the diesel generators. "Under Clause 13 of your bonding agreement, Titan Surety is exercising its right to immediate material verification." The foreman, a good man named Miller, who I had hired 10 years ago, looked confused. He picked up his radio. "Sir, we are scheduled for inspection next month," Miller said, trying to be polite. "We have concrete trucks pouring in an hour. You are going to back up the whole schedule. Cancel the trucks," Harris said. He did not even look up from his clipboard. "We are drilling core samples. Now." I watched Miller's face pale. He knew what a core sample meant. It meant drilling a cylinder of concrete right out of the structure to test its compression strength. But more importantly, it meant exposing the steel rebar hidden inside. Miller scrambled to the site phone. I knew who he was calling. 3 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Marcus. I let it ring 3 times. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to feel the walls closing in. Just a little bit. On the 4th ring, I picked up. "Hello," I sounded groggy. Like an old man woken from a nap. "Dad." Marcus's voice was high, pitched with a panic he was trying desperately to suppress. "I need you. I need you to listen to me very carefully." I leaned back in my chair and pressed the record button on the call interface. "Slow down, son," I said, keeping my voice confused. "What is wrong? I was just watching the game show." "Screw the game show," he was hyperventilating. "There are inspectors at the site, from the surety company, Titan. They are demanding a core sample. Right now, they are setting up the diamond drills. Dad. They are going to be cut into pylon 4. I took a slow breath. So let them drill. If the concrete is cured, it will pass. "You use the standard mix, right? 4000 psi? There was silence on the line. A heavy, guilty silence. "Marcus," I prompted. "Dad." "Listen," he whispered. "The concrete is fine. It is steel." "What about the steel?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. I needed him to say it. I needed it on the tape. We had to make some adjustments to the budget," he stammered. "The price of steel skyrocketed last quarter. You know how it is. We had to value engineer the specs. Value engineer is a corporate euphemism for cutting corners." "What did you do?" Marcus, I asked, dropping the confused act just enough to sound like a concerned father. "We switched the rebar," he admitted. His voice was so quiet, I almost had to press the phone to my ear. "The specs called for A572. We got a deal on a shipment from overseas. It is unrated." "Dad." "But the supplier said it is basically the same thing. It is just a little less carbon." My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned white. "Basically the same thing." That phrase has killed more people in this industry than gravity itself. "You put unrated scrap metal into the suspension pylons of a bridge that is supposed to carry 50,000 cars a day," I asked. "It is not scrap," he snapped. "Defensive now. It is just grade B. It is fine. But if they drill into it and test the tensile strength, the numbers are going to come back low. They are going to see it is not A572. He took a breath. And then he asked the question that sealed his fate. "Dad, you have been in this business for 40 years. There has to be a way to fix this. Is there a way to—" "I do not know. Coat the sample or maybe interfere with the sensor. How do we make it pass?" I closed my eyes. There it was. He was not asking for forgiveness. He was not asking how to reinforce the bridge to make it safe. He was asking me, his father, to teach him how to commit fraud. He wanted me to be an accomplice to a potential disaster. I looked at the recording timer ticking upward on my screen. 1 minute and 40 seconds. "Marcus," I said slowly, "You want me to tell you how to fake a load-bearing test? I need you to help me save the company," he shouted. "If they pull the bond, we are dead. Elena will kill me. Just tell me what to do. You always have a trick. You always know how to solve problems." I looked at the live feed. The diamond drill was biting into the concrete now. A slurry of gray mud was pouring out of the hole. "I do know how to solve problems, Marcus," I said. "Great. Okay, tell me. What do I tell the foreman? Do we heat the sample? Do we—" I cut him off. My voice changed. It was no longer the voice of a tired retiree. It was the voice of the man who had built the skyline he was looking at. "Marcus," I said, cold and hard. "There is no trick." What he paused. "There is no trick to physics," I said. "You cannot cheat the laws of tension and compression. You put garbage steel in a critical support structure." "Dad, stop lecturing me and help me. I am helping you," I said. "I am helping you understand something you should have learned when you were 12. I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. Rule number 1 of being an engineer, Marcus. You never lie to gravity, because gravity always finds out the truth, and it usually kills people when it does. I moved my finger to the end call button. "Good luck with the inspection, son." Dad, wait." I hung up. I saved the recording. I titled the file confession_Marcus Smith _skylinebridge.mp3. Then, I emailed it directly to Victor Hale. 10 minutes later, on the video feed, I saw Harris pull the core sample out of the drill. It was a long, gray cylinder of concrete. Running through the middle of it was a twisted bar of steel. Harris did not even need to send it to the lab to know. He took a bottle of acid from his kit and put a drop on the exposed metal. It fizzed and turned a dark, sickly black instantly. High-quality steel reacts slowly, cheap. High-impurity steel reacts fast. Harris picked up his radio. I could not hear what he said, but I saw the result. He turned to Miller, the foreman, and made a cutting motion across his throat. "Shut it down." Miller blew the sight whistle. The long, shrill blast echoed across the river. The cranes stopped moving. The cement mixers cut their engines. The welders put down their torches. Silence fell over the job site. It was the most terrifying sound in the construction business. The sound of a stopped heart. Back at the Iron Corps headquarters, the party was still going. Elena was likely showing off the fabric swatches for the bridge's opening ceremony ribbons. She had no idea that the bridge would never open. I checked my internal email. Victor was fast. He had already drafted the formal notice based on the field report Harris had just uploaded. Notice of immediate suspension of surety bond. RE project, Alpha 9, Skyline Bridge. Reason material breach of contract. Fraudulent specification. Adherence. I read it over. It was brutal. It was a death sentence for the project, without a surety bond. It is illegal to continue construction on a public works project. The city would revoke the permits within the hour. The bank would freeze the funding by lunch. "Send it," I whispered. I imagined the fax machine in the executive assistant's office at Iron Corps. It would beep. A harmless little digital chirp. And then, it would spit out a piece of paper that weighed more than the entire building. I switched my attention to the financial surveillance I had on Elena, while her husband was hyperventilating on the phone with me. Elena's credit card activity showed she was at a boutique in the downtown district. Transaction $4,500. Merchant Luxe Interiors. Item Italian silk drapes. She was buying curtains for an office that was about to be foreclosed on. I picked up my phone and dialed Victor. "Did you send the notice?" I asked. "Sent and received," Victor replied. His voice was grim. "The site is shut down. Robert, I just got a call from the city engineer. They are furious. They are talking about an immediate investigation." "Good," I said. "What about the accounts?" "We are freezing them now," Victor said. "But Robert, Elena is trying to move money. My alerts are going crazy. She is trying to wire $200,000 to that shell company in the Caymans. She must have sensed something was wrong. Maybe Marcus called her. Maybe she just had a rat's instinct for a sinking ship. "Block it," I commanded. "I can't block it legally without a court order," Victor said. "Not unless—" "Unless what? Unless the majority shareholder authorizes a freeze on all executive discretionary spending." I smiled. It was a cold, tight smile. "Marcus thinks he is the majority shareholder. He owns 30%. Elena owns nothing. The board holds 25. "And the remaining 45%, Victor asked. Though he knew the answer. "The remaining 45% is held by Cornerstone Equity," I said. "Which is me. Technically." Marcus thought Cornerstone was just a silent investor group that had bailed him out years ago. He had no idea I was the man behind the curtain. "Draft the authorization. Victor. Sign it as the managing director of Cornerstone. Freeze the accounts. Let the wire transfer bounce." I wanted to stand at the counter of that bank and feel the card declined. "Done," Victor said. I hung up and leaned back. The adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving behind a deep, aching exhaustion. I looked at the screen one last time. The construction site was abandoned. The workers were walking to their cars, carrying their lunchboxes. They would be paid. I would make sure of that personally. Out of my own pocket if I had to, but for Marcus and Elena. The payday was over. My phone buzzed again. It was Marcus, then a text, then another call. "Dad." "What did you do, Dad?" "Pick up. Dad. The bond is gone. They stopped the work. Dad, please." I turned the phone over, face down. I was not his dad right now. I was the force of nature he had ignored. I was the gravity he had lied to. And just as I had told him, gravity always finds out the truth. I stood up and walked to the small kitchenette to make a sandwich. I cut the crusts off the bread, just the way Sarah used to do for me. I sat at my small, wobbly table and ate in silence. The first domino had fallen. The sound was thunderous, but only I could hear it. The rest would follow in quick succession. The panic, the lawsuits, the finger-pointing. They would turn on each other. Wolves always do when the meat runs out. I took a bite of my sandwich. It tasted like justice. Dry, hard to swallow, but necessary. Tomorrow. The banks will call. Tomorrow. The city will sue. But today, right now, somewhere in a high-end boutique. Elena was about to hand a black credit card to a cashier, and for the first time in her life, she was going to hear the word no. I wished I could be there to see it, but I had work to do. I had a company to reclaim, and a legacy to rebuild from the ashes of their arrogance. Bad news travels fast, but panic travels at the speed of light. By 10 o'clock that morning, the news that Titan Surety had pulled the bond on the Skyline Bridge project had hit the wire services. By 10:15, the blogosphere was speculating about structural failures. By 10:30, Iron Core Dynamics stock, which had been trading at $42 a share, plummeted to $12. I sat in my apartment, watching the ticker on the business news channel. It was a red line falling off a cliff. It was a graph of my son's arrogance meeting reality. The anchor woman, a blonde with a sharp voice, was reading the press release Titan Surety my company had issued 20 minutes ago. Titan Surety Group has suspended all bonding guarantees for Iron Core Dynamics effective immediately due to discovered irregularities in material compliance and potential breach of safety protocols. The Skyline Bridge project is halted pending a federal investigation. Irregularities. It was a polite word for fraud. In the construction world, that word is a death sentence. I watched as the Chiron at the bottom of the screen scrolled past. Iron Core credit rating downgraded to junk status. Major banks freeze revolving lines of credit. That was the second domino. Banks are cowardly creatures. They will lend you an umbrella when the sun is shining. But the second they smell rain, they snatch it back. Marcus had been funding his lifestyle and Elena's branding empire on cheap credit, using the company's projected earnings as collateral. Now that the project was dead, the collateral was worthless. The banks were locking the doors. My phone remained silent. I knew Marcus was frantic. I knew he was running around the city, sweating through his custom shirt, trying to find another surety company to step in and save him. But he would find no takers. I had made sure of that. When Victor filed the suspension notice, he also updated the National Surety Database, the blacklist, that every underwriter checks before issuing a bond. Next to the name, Iron Core Dynamics. There was now a flag material fraud/safety violation. No underwriter in their right mind would touch him. Not for $1 billion in premiums. He was radioactive. The afternoon dragged on. I spent it cleaning my tools. I had a small workbench in the corner of the living room. It was my sanctuary. I laid out a soft cloth and placed my favorite instrument on it, a Starrett Master Vernier caliper. It was 40 years old, made of hardened stainless steel with a satin chrome finish. It was accurate to 1/1000th of an inch. It was honest. It told you exactly what was there, not what you wanted to see. Around 4 o'clock, I heard a car pull into the gravel lot outside. I did not need to look out the window to know who it was. The engine note of a Porsche Cayenne Turbo is distinct and aggressive. Throaty growl that sounded ridiculous in this neighborhood of rusted sedans and minivans. I kept cleaning the caliper. I dipped a cotton swab in oil and ran it along the main scale. Steps on the stairs. Heavy, hurried steps. Then, a pounding on the door. Dad, are you in there? I took my time. I wiped the excess oil from the tool. I placed it gently on the cloth. Then I stood up and walked to the door. When I opened it, Marcus looked like a man who had been chased by wolves. His tie was loosened, hanging askew around his neck. His hair, usually gelled into a helmet of perfection, was wild. There were dark circles of sweat under the arms of his pale blue shirt. He looked past me, scanning the small, dim apartment as if checking for spies. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice tight. I stepped aside. He walked in and immediately began pacing. He looked at the peeling paint on the walls, the thrift store couch, the small kitchenette. He grimaced. "Jesus, Dad. It smells like mothballs here. How can you live like this?" I closed the door. "I live within my means. Marcus, it is a peaceful way to live. You should try it sometime." He let out a short, hysterical laugh. "Try it." "Yeah, that is funny." He stopped pacing and turned to me. He took a deep breath, composing himself. I could see him putting on the mask, the CEO dealing with a crisis mask. But it was slipping. The fear underneath was too raw. "Dad, we have a situation," he said. I walked back to my workbench and sat down. I picked up the caliper again. I saw the news. "Marcus, the stock is down 70%. The bridge is shut down." "It is a misunderstanding," he shouted, waving his hands. "The surety company, this Titan group, they are out of control. They found one bad sample. One. And they nuked the whole project. I am going to sue them into oblivion." I adjusted the sliding jaw of the caliper. Click, click. "You cannot sue them if the steel really was bad." "Marcus," I said quietly. "Was it?" He froze. He looked away, focusing on a stain on the carpet. "That is not the point," he muttered. "The point is, they froze everything. The banks panicked. Wells Fargo locked our operating accounts an hour ago. I can't even buy a tank of gas with the corporate card." I looked at him. "So why are you here?" He walked over and knelt beside my chair. It was a theatrical gesture, one he must have seen in a movie. He put his hand on my knee. His palm was damp. "Dad, I need a favor. A big one." I looked at his hand on my cheap denim jeans. I remembered the party. I remembered him turning his back. "What kind of favor?" "I need cash," he said. "Fast." "How much?" $50,000. I raised an eyebrow. "50,000. He nodded eagerly. "Just for a few days. Just until I can clear up this mess with the lawyers. The thing is, payroll is due on Friday. I have 300 guys on that site. If I do not pay them, they walk. And if they walk, the union strikes. And if the union strikes, we are done. He squeezed my knee. I am doing this for the workers. Dad, you always taught me to take care of the men first. I can't let them go hungry because of a banking glitch. I stared at him. The lie was so smooth, so practiced. He did not know that I knew exactly how surety bonds worked. When a surety pulls a bond and freezes assets, they assume the liability for the payroll. Titan surety. My company was already cutting checks for those workers. They would be paid tomorrow morning, direct deposit, fully guaranteed. Marcus did not need $50,000 for the workers. He needed it for Elena. I knew from Victor's report that Elena had a $50,000 payment due on her personal credit card, the black card she used to buy Hermes bags and first-class tickets. If she missed that payment, the card would be canceled, and her credit score would tank for a woman like Elena. Losing her credit rating was worse than death. It was social suicide. She had sent him here. She had told him to go squeeze the old man. She probably thought I had a retirement fund tucked away in a mattress somewhere. I looked at my son. He was lying to my face, using the welfare of the workers, the very men he had endangered with cheap steel as a shield for his wife's vanity. I gently removed his hand from my knee. Payroll, I repeated. Yes, he said, his eyes wide and pleading. For the families. I picked up the caliper and held it up to the light. I measured the air between the jaws. You know, Marcus, I said, this tool measures truth. It tells you exactly how thick something is. It tells you if a bolt will fit in a hole. It does not guess. Dad. We do not have time for metaphors, he snapped. Do you have the money or not? I know Mom left you the life insurance. I know you haven't spent it living in this dump. The insult landed softly. I was immune to his judgment now. I stood up. I walked to the kitchen counter where I kept a small jar of cash for groceries. Marcus watched me, hope flaring in his eyes. He thought he had won. He thought the guilt trip had worked. I reached into the jar. I pulled out a single bill. I walked back to him. He held out his hand, expecting a checkbook, expecting a stack of hundreds. I placed a $20 bill in his palm. He stared at it. Then he looked up at me, confused. What is this gas money? I said. He blinked. What you said you couldn't buy gas with the corporate card, I said calmly. That is $20. It should get you enough gas to drive home to your mansion. His face turned red. A deep, ugly flush that started at his neck and crept up to his hairline. Is this a joke? He hissed. I asked you for $50,000 to save the company, and you gave me 20. I sat back down and picked up the oil rag. I am not giving you $50,000, Marcus. Not for payroll. Not for anything. Why? He screamed. He stood up, knocking the chair over. Why are you being so selfish? You are sitting on that insurance money. You are letting your own son drown. I looked at him calmly. Tell me, Marcus. At the party last night. What did your wife call me? He froze. The anger in his eyes flickered, replaced by fear. What you heard me, Elena. She stood in front of the buffet and said something to me. Everyone laughed. You laughed. What did she say? He swallowed hard. Dad. She was drunk. She didn't mean say it, I commanded. My voice was low, but it had the rumble of a generator starting up. He looked down. She said, Charity cases eat last. I nodded. Charity cases eat last. I pointed to the $20 bill in his hand. That $20, that is charity. Marcus, I am giving it to you because you are broke. I am giving it to you because you are desperate. I leaned forward. But $50,000, that is an investment. And I do not invest in people who think I am a joke. He crushed the bill in his fist. You are enjoying this. Aren't you? He spat. You are enjoying seeing me beg. Number one, I said. I am not enjoying it. I am inspecting it. I am looking at you, and I am trying to find the man I raised. But all I see is a hollow shell that echoes whatever his wife tells him to say. I stood up again, taller this time. The workers will be paid. Marcus, the surety company pays them when the contractor defaults. I know the law, so do not lie to me about the families. You want that money for Elena. You want it to pay off her credit card so she does not have to face the humiliation of being declined at the Gucci store. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked terrified. How did I know he could not figure it out? He just saw an old man in a flannel shirt who seemed to know everything. Go home. Marcus, I said. Go home and tell your wife that the charity case is closed. The kitchen is closed. There are no scraps left for you. He stood there for a long moment, breathing hard. He looked at the crumpled bill in his hand. For a second. I thought he was going to throw it at me, but he didn't. He shoved the $20 into his pocket. He took the money. That was the moment I knew he was truly lost. A man with a shred of dignity would have thrown it on the floor. A man with pride would have walked out. But Marcus Smith took the $20 because he needed it. Because he was exactly what he had accused me of being. He was a beggar. You are going to regret this, Dad, he whispered. When I fix this, when I get the bridge back, you are never going to see us again. I sat down and started wiping the caliper again. Fix the bridge first, Marcus. Then we can talk about who sees who. He turned and stormed out. He slammed the door so hard, the thin walls shook. I heard the Porsche start up outside. It revved aggressively, tires spinning in the gravel, throwing stones against the side of the building. Then it roared away. I looked at the empty space on the rug where he had knelt. I checked the time. It was 5:30. I pulled out my phone and texted Victor. He just left. He asked for 50,000. I gave him 20. Victor replied instantly. Elena just tried to transfer 50,000 from the employee pension fund to her personal checking. The bank flagged it and blocked it. I closed my eyes. They were not just desperate. They were becoming dangerous. Stealing from the pension fund was a federal crime. If that transaction had gone through, Marcus and Elena would be facing 10 years in prison, in a way, by freezing the accounts. I had saved them from themselves. Not that they would ever thank me. I looked at the caliper in my hand. It was clean now, shining, perfect. I put it back in its wooden case and snapped the lid shut. The first inspection was over. The structure had failed. Now comes the demolition. I walked to the kitchen and made a cup of tea. I stood by the window and watched the sun go down over the parking lot. The gravel was still disturbed where Marcus had peeled out. I took a sip of tea. It was hot and bitter. Tonight, Elena would be screaming. Tonight. The reality of asset freeze would hit them like a wrecking ball. They would have to eat whatever was in the pantry. I hoped they liked the taste of humility, but knowing them, they would just choke on it. I went back to my desk and opened the laptop. I had one more email to send. To the City Council of Seattle. Subject proposal for emergency infrastructure remediation. Attachment proof of funds. Titan Surety Group. If Iron Core could not finish the bridge, someone had to. And I was not about to let my city be stuck with a half-finished monument to my son's failure. I hit send. The game was changing. I was not just the bondholder anymore. I was about to become a builder again. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in corporate disintegration. The city of Seattle did not just stop the Skyline Bridge project, they crime scene taped it. Yellow barriers went up around the perimeter, and municipal inspectors swarmed the site like ants on a dropped lollipop. By Tuesday morning, the official stop work order was plastered on the main gate. The citation cited gross negligence and fraudulent material submission. Iron Core Dynamics was not just bleeding money anymore. It was hemorrhaging liability. Lawsuits began to pile up on the reception desk faster than the mailroom could sort them. The subcontractors sued for breach of contract. The material suppliers sued for non-payment. The city sued for damages and delays. The total estimated liability was north of $200 million. And then, the rats started eating each other. I watched it happen from my digital perch. I had access to the internal security feeds of the Iron Core Executive Suite cameras I had installed years ago for security that were now my personal theater. It was Wednesday afternoon. The office was half empty. Most of the staff had walked out when the payroll checks bounced checks that Titan Surety had not yet covered, because we were legally required to wait for the default period to trigger. A waiting game I used to let the pressure build. In the CEO's office, the air conditioning was humming, but the atmosphere was suffocating. Marcus was slumped at his desk, his head in his hands. He looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and there was a stain on his cuff. Elena was pacing the room. She was on her phone, screaming at someone. "What do you mean you can't liquidate the portfolio?" she shrieked. "It is my money. It is in my name." I knew who she was talking to. It was her broker, and I knew exactly why he was saying no. Titan Surety had filed a preliminary injunction against all assets connected to the Iron Core executive team, freezing everything pending the fraud investigation. She threw the phone onto the leather couch. It bounced harmlessly. "This is your fault, Marcus," she hissed, turning on him. "You and your stupid bridge. You and your cheap steel." "I told you to be careful." Marcus looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. "You told me to cut costs." "Elena," he shouted back, his voice cracking. "You told me we needed more cash flow for the rebranding. You told me to use the overseas supplier." "I did no such thing," she lied, her face a mask of indignation. "I am the brand director. I don't know anything about steel. You are the CEO. This is on you." She walked over to the safe hidden behind a painting of a modern abstract nightmare. She punched in the code. "I am leaving. Marcus. I am taking the jewelry, and I am going to my mother's in Aspen. You can deal with this mess." She opened the safe. It was empty. She froze. "Where are the diamonds, Marcus?" "Where is the Cartier watch?" Marcus laughed. It was a dry, broken sound. "I pawned them," he said, "last week, to pay for the launch party. To pay for your champagne and your ice sculptures." Elena stared at him. Her face went from shock to pure, unadulterated hatred. "You loser," she whispered. "You pathetic, useless loser." She grabbed her purse and marched toward the door. But before she left, she stopped and turned around. "By the way," she said, her voice dripping with venom, "you want to know where I was last night when you were crying to your daddy?" Marcus stared at her. "I was with Julian," she said. Julian was the CFO of Apex Construction, Iron Core's biggest rival. He is going to buy the company for pennies on the dollar when you go to prison. Marcus. And I am going to be right there beside him. She slammed the door. I watched Marcus on the screen. He didn't move. He didn't chase her. He just sat there, staring at the closed door, completely and utterly alone. That was the moment. The absolute bottom. I opened my email client. It was time to throw him a rope. A rope that was actually a noose. But he wouldn't know the difference until it was too late. I sent the email from a generic address associated with Titan Surety's Distressed Asset Division. Subject: Emergency Liquidity Proposal. I watched the screen. Marcus's computer dinged. He ignored it. It dinged again. Priority flag. He slowly reached for the mouse. He clicked the email. I could see his eyes moving as he read. Dear Mr. Smith, Titan Surety Group, representing an anonymous consortium of investors, is willing to offer a restructuring package to avoid immediate bankruptcy and criminal litigation. We are prepared to inject $15 million of emergency liquidity to settle immediate liabilities with the city and unions. Conditions 1. Full transfer of all personal equity in Iron Core Dynamics, held by Marcus Smith and Elena Smith, to the investor group. 2. Liquidation of all personal real estate assets, the Highland estate and luxury vehicles to cover the fraud penalty. 3. Immediate resignation of the current board of directors. Deadline, 24 hours. Marcus sat up. He read it again. It was a terrible deal. It left him with nothing. No company, no house, no money. But it kept him out of jail. The fraud penalty clause was the key. If he settled the debts voluntarily, Titan Surety would drop the criminal complaint for the material fraud. We would classify it as administrative error and settle the civil fines. He would be broke, but he would be free. He picked up his phone. He dialed Elena. She didn't answer. He dialed again. She picked up. What she snapped. "Come back," Marcus said, his voice trembling. "We have an offer. We can stay out of prison, but we have to sign everything over. Everything. The stock, the house, the cars." There was a long silence on the line. I could hear Elena calculating. She knew Julian at Apex wouldn't touch her if she was a convicted felon. She needed a clean break. "Fine," she said. "I will be there in 20 minutes. Call the lawyers." I sat back in my chair. Gotcha. The next morning, I woke up early. The sky was gray and heavy, threatening rain. It was fitting. I showered and shaved. I trimmed my mustache. Then, I went to the back of my closet. Hanging in a garment bag was a suit I had bought in Milan 10 years ago. It was a Brioni, charcoal gray with a subtle pinstripe. It cost $6,000. Sarah had made me buy it for our 30th anniversary. I had worn it exactly once. I took it out. The fabric was still crisp. I put it on. It fit perfectly. I tied a silk tie, a deep crimson red. I put on my gold cufflinks, the ones shaped like tiny I-beams. I looked in the mirror. Robert Smith, the retiree in the flannel shirt, was gone. In his place stood Robert Smith, the founder, the Titan. I walked out to my truck. I didn't care that I was wearing a $6,000 suit in a beat-up Ford. The truck was part of who I was. It was the iron core. The suit was just the cladding. I drove to the cemetery first. It was quiet on the hill. The grass was wet with dew. I stood in front of Sarah's headstone. It was simple granite, polished to a mirror shine. Sarah Elizabeth Smith, beloved wife, mother, builder. I took off my hat. The rain started to drizzle, light and cold. "I am sorry, Sarah," I whispered. I touched the cold stone. "I gave him the chance you asked for. I gave him the room. I gave him the money. I gave him 5 years to prove he was your son." I paused, listening to the wind rustle the leaves of the oak tree we had planted. "But he is not a builder, Sarah. He is a demolition man. He took everything we made, the reputation, the trust, the quality, and he sold it for parts. He tried to cheat gravity." I took a deep breath. "I have to take it back, honey. I have to take it all back. Not for me, but for the name on the building. For the 300 families who are scared today." I felt a strange sense of peace. I knew she would understand. Sarah was kind, but she was tough. She never suffered fools, and she certainly never suffered thieves. I put my hat back on. "I love you," I said. "Watch over me today." "It is going to be a rough pour." I walked back to the truck, the gravel crunching under my polished dress shoes. I drove toward the city. The skyline was gray, but the iron core tower stood out, dark and imposing. I pulled into the underground garage of the Titan Surety building, a nondescript office tower 2 blocks from Iron Core. I parked in the spot marked "Reserved." I took the elevator up to the penthouse floor. The conference room was ready. Victor Hale was already there, sitting at the head of the long mahogany table. He looked up as I walked in. His eyes widened when he saw the suit. "You look like war, Robert," he said. "I feel like war," I replied. "Are they here?" "They are in the waiting room," Victor said. "They look diminished." "Good," I said. "Let them wait another 10 minutes. Let them sweat." I walked to the window and looked out at the city. I could see the yellow cranes of the Skyline Bridge in the distance. frozen against the sky like dead insects. I checked the paperwork one last time. Hostile takeover agreement, asset forfeiture decree, resignation of executive officers. It was all there, a stack of papers 3 inches thick, the tombstone of my son's career. Victor checked his watch. "It is time, Robert." I nodded. I turned away from the window. I adjusted my cuffs. I buttoned my jacket. "Let's go," I said. I walked toward the double doors of the conference room. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with the heavy, rhythmic thud of a pile driver. I was about to walk into a room and destroy my son, but I was also about to save my company. It is a terrible thing to have to choose between your blood and your life's work. But Marcus had made the choice for me when he turned his back at the party. Charity cases eat last. I reached for the door handle. The metal was cold. Well, Marcus, I thought, lunch is served. The air in the conference room on the 40th floor was thin, recycled, and smelled faintly of ozone and fear. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, the gray Seattle sky looked like a slab of wet slate pressing down on the city. I stood in the hallway, adjusting the cuffs of my Brioni suit. I could see them through the glass, Marcus and Elena. They sat on opposite sides of the long mahogany table, looking less like a married couple and more like two prisoners awaiting sentencing. Marcus was hunched over, his elbows on the table, his head in his hands. He was vibrating with anxiety. Elena sat rigid, her spine failing to touch the back of the leather chair, her face a mask of furious calculation. She was checking her phone every 30 seconds, likely looking for a miracle that was not coming. I signaled Victor Hale. He nodded, straightened his tie, and opened the door. I stayed back, out of sight, listening. "Good morning," Victor said. His voice was smooth, professional, and completely devoid of warmth. I heard Marcus scramble to his feet. "Mr. Hale," Marcus stammered. "Thank God you are here. Look, about the deadline. We need a little more time to organize the asset transfer. The title for the house is... It is complicated. Sit down." "Mr. Smith," Victor said. I heard the squeak of the leather chair as Marcus collapsed back into it. "We are not here to negotiate timelines," Victor continued. "I have the papers prepared. This is a full surrender of equity. You sign over 100% of your voting shares in Iron Core Dynamics to Titan Surety Group. In exchange, we assume the immediate debt liabilities and halt the civil litigation regarding the Skyline Bridge default." There was a pause. Then Elena's voice cut through the air, shrill and sharp. "And the criminal charges?" she asked. "What about the fraud allegations if you sign?" Victor said. "Titan Surety will classify the material discrepancy as an internal procurement error. We will pay the city fines. There will be no police involvement. However, this offer expires in exactly," he paused, likely checking his Rolex. 45 minutes. 45 minutes, Elena shouted. "That is insane. This is coercion. You are forcing us to sign away a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars for what? For freedom, for survival." "Mrs. Smith," Victor corrected. "And currently, the company is not worth millions. It is worth negative $16 million in immediate liabilities. You are bankrupt. We are offering you a lifeboat." "I want to speak to your boss," Elena demanded. Her voice rose an octave. "I am not signing anything until I look the chairman of Titan Surety in the eye. I know how these things work. There is always a deal to be made. I want to see him." Now I heard Victor sigh. It was a theatrical sigh. "Are you sure about that, Mrs. Smith? The chairman is not known for his patience." "I don't care," Elena screamed. "Get him in here. I bet he doesn't even know you are bullying us like this. I bet I can make him understand the value of the Iron Core brand." I smiled. It was a cold tightening of the muscles around my mouth. That was my cue. I stepped out from the alcove and walked toward the door. I did not rush. I walked with the heavy, rhythmic gait of a man who owns the floor he is walking on. I pushed the heavy door open. It swung inward with a silent, expensive whoosh. The room went quiet. Marcus turned his head. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and frantic. When he saw me, his expression went blank. He blinked, once, twice, as if his brain was refusing to process the visual data. "Dad," he whispered. Elena turned. Her mouth was open, ready to launch another tirade. But the words died in her throat. She looked me up and down. She saw the charcoal Italian wool. She saw the silk tie. She saw the gold cufflinks. But she did not see Robert the tycoon. She saw Robert at the charity case, playing dress-up. "What are you doing here?" Elena snapped, her shock instantly reverting to annoyance. "Did you follow us, Robert? This is a private legal meeting. You can't be here." Marcus looked at Victor, then back at me. He let out a nervous, confused laugh. "Dad. Seriously," he said. "Did you get a job here? Are you working security now? Is that why you are wearing the suit?" I did not answer. I did not even look at him. I walked past him. I could smell the stale sweat coming off his designer shirt. I walked past Elena, who recoiled slightly as I brushed by, as if my poverty might be contagious. I walked to the head of the table. Victor Hale stepped aside, grabbed the back of the massive leather chairman's chair, and pulled it out for me. "Thank you, Victor," I said. My voice was low, resonating off the glass walls. I sat down. I placed my hands on the cool mahogany surface, fingers interlocked. I looked down the length of the table at my son and his wife. Marcus was staring at me with his mouth agape. He looked like a fish that had been pulled onto a dock gasping, bug-eyed, drowning in air. "Dad," he said again, his voice trembling. You are sitting in the chairman's seat." I leaned forward. "I am sitting in my seat." "Marcus." Elena slammed her hand on the table. "This is ridiculous, Victor. Get this old man out of here. We demanded to see the chairman of Titan Surety." Not his senile father, Victor, looked at Elena. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just adjusted his glasses. "Mrs. Smith," he said calmly, "you are speaking to the chairman of Titan Surety Group." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence you hear after a structural collapse, after the dust settles, before the sirens start. Elena froze. Her eyes darted from Victor to me, then back to Victor. She was waiting for the punchline. She was waiting for someone to say, "Just kidding." But nobody spoke. I don't understand," Marcus stammered. He looked at me. Really looked at me. For the first time in years, he saw the way the suit fit. He saw the cold intelligence in my eyes that he had mistaken for age. "Dad, you own Titan. I founded Titan Surety Group 5 years ago." "Marcus," I said. My voice was steady. The voice of a man reading a blueprint. "I founded it with the capital I raised from selling my hydraulic patents. The patents you told me were obsolete." Marcus's face went pale. The blood drained out of him so fast, I thought he might faint. But why?" he whispered. "Why did you bond us? Why did you save us? "Because I promised your mother I would give you a chance," I said. "I became your silent partner. I became your bank. I watched you. I waited for you to grow up." I paused, letting the words hang there. "Instead, I watched you turn my company into a casino." Elena found her voice. It was shaking. Are you an investor? You are the one who froze our accounts." I turned my gaze to her. It felt good to look at her without the veil of kindly father-in-law. I looked at her as a creditor, looking at a bad debt. "I am the one who stopped you from stealing another $50,000 from the pension fund yesterday." "Elena." "Yes." She flinched as if I had slapped her. This is entrapment," she screeched, trying to rally her anger. "You set us up. You let us take those loans. You knew." I reached into the leather portfolio Victor had placed next to me. I pulled out a thick black binder. It hit the table with a heavy, dull thud. Project Alpha 9 Material Compliance Audit. I opened it. I didn't set you up. Elena, I inspected the work. And the work was fraudulent. I flipped the binder open to the page with the core sample photos. The black, corroded steel inside the concrete looked like a rotten tooth. Let's talk about the steel, Marcus, I said. Marcus flinched. You purchased 3,000 tons of unrated rebar from a decommissioned mill in Southeast Asia, I said. You paid $400 a ton. The market rate for A572 is $800. You saved $1.2 million. I looked at him. But here is the engineering reality, son. That unrated steel has a carbon content of nearly 9%. It is brittle. It has zero ductility. Do you know what happens to brittle steel when it is subjected to the shear forces of a suspension bridge in high winds? Marcus stared at the table. Answer me, I commanded. You are the CEO. You signed the specs. What happens? It snaps, Marcus whispered. It shears, I corrected. It doesn't just snap, it explodes. If we had let you pour that concrete, if we had let you finish that bridge, the first winter storm would have brought the main span down. I leaned back. You were not building a legacy, Marcus. You were building a mass grave, and you were doing it to save enough money to pay for your wife's consulting fees. I reached into the portfolio again. I pulled out a second file. This one was thinner, but far more damaging. Lumina Brand Solutions Forensic Accounting Report. I slid it down the table toward Elena. It stopped inches from her manicured hands. Open it, I said. She stared at the folder. She didn't move. I will summarize it for you, I said. $1.5 million in 18 months. Transferred to a shell company registered in the Caymans. Invoices for branding services that never happened. Expenses for personal vacations. I looked at her. That is not value engineering. Elena, that is embezzlement. That is a federal crime. Class B felony. Mandatory minimum sentence of 5 years in a federal penitentiary. Elena made a small, choking sound. Tears began to well up in her eyes. Tears of terror, not remorse. Robert, please, she whimpered. Her arrogance was gone, replaced by a pathetic desperation. I didn't mean to. It was just a loan. I was going to pay it back. We are family, I repeated the word. It tasted like ash. I stood up. I walked slowly around the table until I was standing right behind Marcus's chair. He was trembling so hard the chair was vibrating. Family helps family. Right. That is what you told me when you asked for $50,000. I put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. He jumped. But the family does not steal from the pension fund. Marcus. Families do not risk the lives of commuters to buy Italian drapes. I looked at Elena. And the family does not tell the man who built the roof over their heads that he is a charity case. Elena looked down, unable to meet my eyes. I walked back to the head of the table and sat down. Here is the reality, I said. My voice was hard granite. You didn't just break the concrete, you broke the trust. And in this industry, in the world of heavy construction, trust is the only currency that matters. You can lose money, you can lose equipment, but if you lose trust, you are dead. I pointed to the papers Victor had laid out. You are dead. Marcus, Iron Core, under your leadership, is a corpse. I am just here to sign the death certificate. Marcus looked up. Tears were streaming down his face now. Dad, please, he sobbed. I am sorry, I got lost. I didn't know how to stop. Elena kept pushing for more, and the market was turning. And I panicked. I looked at him. For a second. I felt a flicker of pity. But then I remembered the recording. I remembered him asking me how to fake the test. You didn't panic, Marcus. You chose. You chose the easy way. You chose the lie. I tapped the papers, signed them. Marcus looked at the papers. If I sign, do I get anything? He asked weakly. Any severance, I laughed. It was a short, sharp bark. Severance, Marcus. You are $16 million in debt. You are lucky I am not having you arrested right now. You are getting your freedom. That is your severance. I looked at Elena. And you? You are signing too. And then you are going to return every single item you bought with company funds. The cars, the jewelry, the clothes. If it was bought with Iron Core money, it belongs to me. Elena glared at me. Her fear was turning into spite. And if I don't, then Victor calls the FBI, I said simply. And you can explain your branding strategy to a federal prosecutor. She looked at Victor. He was holding his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. She picked up the pen. Her hand was shaking, but she signed. She signed her life away with a scratchy, angry scrawl. Marcus took the pen next. He hesitated. He looked at the document. Resignation of CEO. Transfer of equity. He looked at me one last time. Dad, what are you going to do with the company? I am going to fix it, I said. I am going to tear out the rot. I am going to pour new foundations. And I am going to build something that doesn't fall down when the wind blows. He nodded slowly. He signed. As soon as the ink hit the paper, I felt a physical shift in the room. The tension broke. The deal was done. They were no longer the owners. They were just trespassers. Victor gathered the papers instantly, checking the signatures. Thank you, he said. The transfer is effective immediately. Security is waiting in the lobby to escort you out. You have 20 minutes to clear your personal effects from the executive suite. Marcus stood up. He looked like an old man. He looked older than me. He walked toward the door. He didn't wait for Elena. Elena stood up. She grabbed her purse. She looked at me with pure venom. You planned this, she hissed. You planned this whole thing. You enjoyed it. I looked at her calmly. I didn't plan for you to be a thief. Elena. That was all you. I just planned for the inspection. She turned and ran out of the room, her high heels clicking frantically on the marble floor. The door closed. I was alone in the room with Victor. The silence returned, but this time, it was peaceful. It was the silence of a job site after the demolition charges had gone off. The dust was settling, and the ground was clear for something new. Victor looked at me. Are you okay, Robert? I looked at the empty chairs. I looked at the black binders on the table. I am fine. Victor, I said. I stood up and walked to the window. The rain had stopped. A sliver of sunlight was breaking through the clouds, illuminating the yellow cranes in the distance. Call the site foreman, I said. Tell him to fire up the generators. We have a bridge to build. Victor nodded and left the room to make the call. I stood there for a moment longer, looking at my reflection in the glass. I didn't see a charity case. I saw a builder, and for the first time in 5 years, I was ready to go to work. The ink was drying on the equity transfer documents, but the demolition wasn't finished. I had stripped them of their power, but I hadn't yet stripped them of their illusions. They still thought this was just a business transaction, a hostile takeover where they lost the company but kept their dignity. I wasn't about to let them keep anything that wasn't real. I signaled for Victor to stay in the room. He closed his laptop and folded his hands, his face impassive. There is one more thing, I said. Marcus and Elena had been halfway to the door. They stopped. Elena looked back, her eyes narrowing. We signed your papers. Robert, we are done here. We have packing to do. You are not going back to the estate. Elena, I said. She froze. Excuse me. I picked up a new folder. This one wasn't black. It was red. The equity transfer covers the business debt, I explained. But it doesn't cover personal theft. I opened the folder. You see, when I audited the company, I also audited the personal expenses you ran through the corporate accounts. But I found something else. Something that has nothing to do with Iron Core and everything to do with the IRS. I pulled out a document. It was a tax return, a fraudulent one. You filed joint taxes for the last 3 years claiming zero income from outside consulting. Yet you deposited $1.5 million into your Cayman account. That is tax evasion. Elena. The IRS doesn't like that. They usually give you 3 to 5 years to think about it in a federal prison camp. Elena's face lost all its color. She grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. And then, there is this, I continued, pulling out a stack of photos. They were grainy, taken with a long-range lens. They showed Elena and Julian, the CFO of our rival, sitting at a cafe in Paris, holding hands, kissing. But the most interesting part isn't the romance, I said. It is the documents on the table between you. I pointed to a photo where Julian was reading a blue folder. That is the bid strategy for the Skyline Bridge project. You gave our confidential pricing data to our competitor before the bid was even awarded. That is corporate espionage. Elena. That is another 10 years. Elena looked at Marcus. He was staring at the photos on the table. He looked like a man who had been shot in the gut but hadn't fallen down yet. You gave them our bid, Marcus whispered. Elena didn't answer him. She looked at me. What do you want? She asked, her voice trembling. I want you gone, I said. I want you out of this city. I want you out of my son's life. I checked my watch. You have 24 hours. If you are still within the city limits of Seattle by noon tomorrow, Victor sends this file to the FBI and the IRS. But my clothes, my friends. You have no friends. Elena, you have accomplices. And as for your clothes, take what fits in a suitcase. The rest stays. It is company property now. She started to cry then. It was a pathetic, wailing sound. She dropped to her knees not out of sorrow, but out of a desperate attempt to manipulate the situation. She crawled toward me, grabbing the hem of my pants. Robert, please. You can't do this. I am family. I made a mistake. I was just trying to help Marcus. I was trying to build a future for us. I looked down at her. Her mascara was running, staining her cheeks black. She looked small. She looked exactly like what she was, a grifter who had been caught. I stepped back, pulling my leg away from her grasp. Charity cases eat last, I said. She stopped crying and looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock. You remember that, don't you? I asked. You said it with such confidence at the party. Well, Elena, today is the banquet. And guess what? You are not eating. You are the appetizer. She stared at me, realizing finally that there was no mercy in this room. There were only consequences. She scrambled to her feet, wiped her face, and looked at Marcus. Are you going to let him do this to me? She screamed. Do something. You are the man. Defend your wife. Marcus looked at her. He looked at the photos of her with Julian. He looked at the tax documents. He didn't say a word. Elena let out a scream of frustration. She grabbed her purse and ran. She ran out of the conference room, out of the building, and presumably, out of the state. I never saw her again. The door clicked shut. Now it was just Marcus. He was standing by the table, staring at the photos of his wife's betrayal. He looked broken, not just defeated, but shattered. The arrogant CEO was gone. The polished executive was gone. All that was left was a frightened boy who had lost his way. He slowly sank to his knees. He didn't crawl to me. He just knelt there, head bowed, shoulders shaking. Dad, he sobbed. I am sorry. I watched him. My heart ached. This was my son. This was the boy I had taught to ride a bike. This was the boy I had dreamed would take Iron Core to heights I could never reach. I didn't know, he whispered. I swear I didn't know about Julian. I didn't know she was selling us out. I believe you, I said softly. He looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. But that makes it worse. Marcus, he flinched. You didn't know because you didn't want to know, I said. You let her lead you by the nose because it was easier than leading yourself. You let her spend the money because it was easier than saying no. You let her cut corners on the steel because it was easier than doing the hard work of engineering. I walked over to him. She is a thief, Marcus. She is a bad person. But you are worse. He stared at me. Worse, yes, I said. Because you knew better. I raised you better. You knew right from wrong. You knew that steel has to be pure. You knew that a man's word is his bond. And you threw it all away because you were too cowardly to stand up to your wife. I shook my head. A bad engineer can be taught. Marcus, if you don't know math, I can teach you. If you can't weld, I can show you. But a coward, a man who has no spine. That is structural failure. That is a flaw in the core material. And I don't know if that can be fixed. Marcus put his head in his hands and wept. It was a deep, guttural sound. The sound of a soul realizing it is empty. I let him cry. I let him feel the full weight of his collapse. When he finally stopped, he looked up. His face was blotchy, his eyes swollen. What happens to me? He asked. Am I going to jail? I walked back to the table and picked up the last document. Number 1, I said. I am not sending you to jail. That would be too easy. In jail, you sit around and blame the world. You don't learn anything. I placed the paper in front of him. This is an employment contract, I said. He blinked. You. Are you hiring me? I nodded. As what VP of Operations Consultant, I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Read it. He picked up the paper. His eyes scanned the text. Position, General Laborer, Grade 1. Location Site 4. Skyline Bridge Remediation Project. Hourly wage $18.50. Duties debris removal. Concrete mixing. Manual excavation. He looked up, horrified. A laborer, he whispered. You want me to be a construction worker? I said, I want you to be a man. And right now, you are not there yet. I pointed to the window, toward the bridge. You broke it. Marcus, you broke that bridge. You put poison in its veins. Now, you are going to go down there and fix it. You are going to dig out that bad concrete with a jackhammer. You are going to carry that scrap steel away on your back. You are going to sweat. You are going to bleed. You are going to feel every single ounce of the weight you tried to cheat. But Dad, the guys, they will laugh at me. They know I was the CEO. Good, I said. Let them laugh. Let them see you humble yourself. That is the only way you will ever earn their respect back. You think respect comes from a suit, from a title. Respect comes from the mud, Marcus. It comes from showing up when it is raining and doing the job. I leaned in close. You have a choice. You can walk out that door, follow Elena, and try to find another shortcut. But I promise you, I will make sure you never work in this town again. Or, you can sign this paper. You can put on a hard hat. You can start at the bottom. And maybe, just maybe, if you survive the poor, you might build yourself into something real. Marcus looked at the contract. He looked at his soft, manicured hands. He looked at me. He saw the resolve in my eyes. He knew I wasn't bluffing. He picked up the pen. His hand shook, but he signed. Marcus Smith, laborer. He handed the paper back to me. When do I start? He asked. His voice barely a whisper. Monday morning, I said. 6 a.m. Don't be late. The foreman doesn't like stragglers. And Marcus, yeah, leave the suit, I said. You won't need it where you are going. He stood up. He slowly took off his jacket. He undid his tie. He unbuttoned his cuffs and took out the gold cufflinks, his own. Not mine. He placed them on the mahogany table. He stood there in his shirt sleeves, looking stripped down, vulnerable. He turned and walked to the door. He didn't look back. He walked with a heavy step, the step of a man carrying a heavy load. But as he walked out, I noticed something. His shoulders were a little straighter. I watched him go. I looked at the pile of clothes on the table, the symbols of his vanity. I picked up the employment contract. It was the most important document he had ever signed. I sat down in the chairman's chair and turned it toward the window. The sun was fully out now. The bridge was waiting. I had torn down the house. Now, it was time to see if anything could grow in the rubble. The takeover was swift, surgical, and absolute. At 8 o'clock on Monday morning, I walked through the glass doors of the Iron Corps headquarters. I did not need a security badge. I owned the building, the receptionist. A young woman named Sarah, a good omen. I thought, looked up in terror. She expected mass firings. She expected the doors to be locked. Instead, I told her to call an all-hands meeting in the main atrium. Every employee, every janitor, every junior engineer, if they were on the payroll. I wanted them in the room. 30 minutes later, 300 people stood in the lobby. The air was thick with anxiety. They whispered to each other, clutching their coffee cups like life rafts. They knew the stock had crashed. They knew the bridge was stopped. They thought this was the end. I stood on the raised platform where Marcus used to give his flashy quarterly presentations. I did not use a microphone. I did not need one. My voice had been trained over the roar of diesel engines and riveting guns. "I am Robert Smith," I said. My voice echoed off the marble walls. "I founded this company 40 years ago with a welding torch and a dream. Somewhere along the way, we lost our way. We lost our integrity. We forgot that we do not just build structures. We build trust." I looked at the faces in the crowd. I saw fear. I saw anger. I am here to tell you that the era of shortcuts is over. The era of fake steel is over. I paused. I know you are scared about your jobs. I know the payroll checks bounced last Friday. I held up a piece of paper. It was a certified cashier's check from Titan Surety Group. "This is a deposit of $20 million, I announced. "Every single missed paycheck will be issued by noon today, with a 5% inconvenience bonus." A gasp went through the room. Then, a murmur of disbelief. "But I am not just paying you," I continued. "I am apologizing to you. I let my family destroy your reputation. I let greed take the wheel. That stops today. Iron Corps is under new management, my management, and we have a bridge to fix." The applause started slowly. Just a few hands clapping in the back. Then it grew. It wasn't the polite applause of a boardroom. It was the relieved, thunderous applause of people who had just been pulled back from the edge of a cliff. I spent the rest of the week tearing down my son's mistakes. I authorized the immediate demolition of the compromised pylons on the Skyline Bridge. It cost $4 million to blow up the concrete Marcus had poured. Watching the charges go off was painful. It was watching money burn. But it was necessary. You cannot build a castle on a swamp. We had to get back to the bedrock. I brought in Titan Surety's own forensic engineers to oversee the cleanup. We worked double shifts. I was there every day, in my hard hat and boots, walking the site, checking the rebar, shaking hands with the men. I wasn't the chairman in the ivory tower. I was the old man on the ground. And while I was rebuilding the company, the legal trap I had set for Elena snapped shut with the precision of a steel jaw. It happened on Wednesday afternoon. Victor called me while I was inspecting a crane hoist. "She tried to run," Victor said. His voice was grimly satisfied. Where I asked. SeaTac International Airport. She booked a one-way ticket to Nice, France, first class. Of course. Did she get on the plane? Number Customs stopped her at the gate. I leaned against the cold steel of the crane. Why? Because she was wearing the necklace. Robert. The diamond choker Marcus bought for the gala. The one listed as a corporate asset on the Iron Corps ledger. I smiled. I had specifically listed that necklace as marketing inventory in the asset freeze order. She tried to tell the TSA it was her personal property. Victor continued. But when they ran her passport, The flag popped up. Grand larceny. Theft of corporate property valued over $50,000. Plus, flight to avoid prosecution. Where is she now? County lockup. No bail. The judge considered her a massive flight risk. She is trading her Hermes scarf for an orange jumpsuit as we speak. I hung up. I felt no joy, just a cold sense of closure. Elena had wanted to live a life of high drama and expensive tastes. Now she would have a very long time to think about the cost of things. On Thursday, I drove to the estate, my old house. The house Marcus and Elena had turned into a monument to their ego. It was empty now. The staff had been let go. The furniture was draped in sheets. I walked through the wellness wing, my old study. The walls were painted a sterile white. The smell of sage and expensive candles still lingered, masking the scent of the history they had tried to erase. I had hired an auction house to liquidate everything. The proceeds were not going to me. They were not going to Iron Core. I had set up a direct donation line to the vocational school where I volunteered. Every dollar from Elena's velvet sofas, her crystal chandeliers, her ridiculous modern art, it was all going to buy welding masks and work boots for kids who actually wanted to build something. That is real charity, Elena, I whispered to the empty room. I walked out to the garage. It was a massive 4-car structure where Marcus had kept his collection of luxury vehicles that were now repossessed. I was looking for something specific. I walked past the empty bays to a small storage shed in the back. It was damp and smelled of mildew. This was where they had banished the junk. I started digging through the plastic bins, old holiday decorations, broken garden tools. And then, I found it. A cardboard tube, crushed on one side, shoved behind a bag of fertilizer. I pulled it out and blew off the dust. My hands were shaking slightly. I popped the plastic cap and slid the papers out. They were wrinkled. They smelled like mold. But they were there. The original hand-drawn schematics for the Mark IV crane. The drawings Marcus had watched Elena throw in the trash. He hadn't destroyed them. He had hidden them. Maybe out of guilt. Maybe out of some tiny, lingering shred of respect. I smoothed the paper out on the workbench. The ink was faded, but the lines were still straight. I rolled them up carefully. These were coming with me. They belonged in my office, right next to the new plans for the Skyline Bridge. On Friday morning, I drove to Site 4. It was raining again. A cold, miserable drizzle that turned the construction site into a mud pit. I parked my truck and walked toward the cement mixing station. The crew was hard at work. The air was filled with the grinding of gears and the shouting of foremen. I saw him immediately. He was wearing a neon yellow vest that was 2 sizes too big for him. His hard hat was scuffed. He was covered in gray slurry from his boots to his eyebrows. Marcus Smith, the former CEO, now general laborer, grade 1. He was manning a wheelbarrow, hauling wet concrete to a formwork trench. It was backbreaking work. Concrete weighs 150 pounds per cubic foot. A full wheelbarrow is a test of will. I watched him struggle. The wheel got stuck in a rut. He shoved, grunted, slipped in the mud, and nearly fell. A couple of the older workers were watching him. I recognized them. They were men Marcus had tried to fire 2 years ago to cut costs. "Hey," Hollywood one of them shouted, "put your back into it." "That concrete isn't going to pour itself." Marcus didn't snap back. He didn't fire them. He just gritted his teeth, dug his boots into the mud, and heaved. The wheelbarrow moved. He dumped the load into the trench and wiped the sweat from his eyes with a muddy glove. That was when he saw me. I was standing 10 feet away, dry in my rain gear, holding a thermos of coffee. He froze. He looked at me, then looked down at his muddy clothes. He looked ashamed. I walked over to him. "Form needs to be leveled," I said, pointing to the trench. "You are pouring too fast. You are going to get air pockets." Marcus nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." He grabbed a shovel and started spreading the wet mix. His hands were raw. I could see the blisters bursting on his palms through the cheap work gloves. He moved stiffly. his muscles clearly screaming in protest after a week of manual labor he had never done in his life. I stood there and watched him work for 10 minutes. I didn't help him. Helping him would be robbing him of the lesson. When the whistle blew for break time, the other workers filed toward the food truck. Marcus stayed behind. He sat on an overturned bucket, his head hanging low, his chest heaving. I walked over and stood in front of him. He looked up. His face was streaked with dirt and exhaustion. "How are the hands?" I asked. "They hurt," he whispered. "Everything hurts." "Good," I said. "That is the feeling of earning your money." He looked at the construction site around us, the massive cranes, the deep pits, the raw steel jutting out of the earth. "Dad," he said. His voice was hoarse. I waited. "How long?" he asked. "What? How long did you plan this, the takeover? The trap for Elena, the bridge inspection? You had the paperwork ready in minutes. You had the forensic accountants ready. You must have been planning this for months, maybe years." He looked at me with a mixture of awe and fear. "Did you hate me that much? Did you wait until I was at the very top, just so the fall would hurt more?" I looked at my son. I saw the confusion in his eyes. He still thought this was a game of chess. He still thought this was about power. I crouched down so I was eye level with him. The rain drummed on our hard hats. "I didn't plan this for years. Marcus, I didn't want this." Then when he asked, "When did you decide to burn it all down?" I looked toward the river, thinking back to that night at the hotel, the chandeliers, jazz music, the plate of food in my hand. I looked back at him. "I decided the moment you looked away," I said. He blinked. "At the party," I continued. "When your wife called me a charity case. When the room laughed. I looked at you, Marcus. I looked for my son. I looked for the man I raised to have a spine." I tapped his chest with my finger. "If you had walked over to me, if you had told her to shut up, if you had shown even 1 ounce of loyalty, none of this would have happened." Marcus stared at me. His mouth opened slightly. "You mean, if I had just defended you, you would have let the fraud slide?" "No," I said sternly. "I would have fired you for the steal. I would have made you pay back the money. But I wouldn't have destroyed you. We would have fixed it together. We would have handled it like family." I stood up, towering over him. "But when you turned your back on me, you decided you weren't family anymore. You decided I was just an obstacle, and I realized that as long as I was your safety net, you would never learn to walk on the wire." Marcus looked down at his hands. He was crying again, the tears mixing with the mud on his face. "I didn't do this for revenge." "Marcus," I said, "revenge is for children. This has consequences." I stepped back and let gravity do its job. You built a life out of lies, and I just removed the scaffolding. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a tube of antibiotic ointment and a roll of heavy-duty medical tape. I tossed them into his lap. "Wrap those blisters," I said. "Concrete infection is nasty." I turned to walk away. "Dad," he called out. I stopped, but I didn't turn around. "Am I ever going to get out of this hole?" he asked. "That depends on you," I said. "You are digging the hole right now. But if you keep working, eventually, you will be building the foundation." I walked to my truck. I climbed in and started the engine. Through the rain-slicked window, I saw Marcus sitting on the bucket. He picked up the tape I had thrown at him. He stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, he started to wrap his hands. He wasn't quitting. He wasn't walking off the job. For the first time in his life, Marcus Smith was preparing to do the work. I put the truck in gear and drove away. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel happy. I felt the heavy, quiet satisfaction of a structural engineer who has finally stabilized a collapsing building. The facade was gone. The decorations were stripped away. It was ugly. It was raw. And it was covered in mud. But for the first time in 5 years, the foundation was solid. It has been exactly 365 days since I walked out of the Grand Riverfront Hotel while my son turned his back on me. Tonight, there is another party. But there are no crystal chandeliers. There are no ice sculptures of swans melting in the heat. There are no waiters in tuxedos serving shrimp on silver trays to people who have never lifted anything heavier than a fountain pen. We are in the original iron core workshop in the industrial district. The floor is stained concrete, scrubbed clean but still bearing the scars of 40 years of heavy machinery. The air smells of slow-cooked brisket, sawdust, and the sharp, metallic tang of hydraulic oil. It is the 40th anniversary celebration. Take two. But this time, we are doing it right. I stood on the mezzanine, looking down at the crowd. There were 200 people below me. I saw Miller, the foreman, laughing with a group of welders. I saw Sarah, the receptionist, showing pictures of her new baby to the head of accounting. These were the people who actually built the company. These were the hands that tied the rebar and poured the concrete. And in the back, near the open bay doors, I saw him, Marcus. He looked different. The soft, doughy look of a man who spent his life in air-conditioned boardrooms was gone. He had lost 20 pounds. His face was tanned and weathered, etched with new lines around his eyes, not from stress, but from squinting against the sun and the wind. He was wearing a flannel shirt and work boots that were scuffed white at the toes. He was not holding court. He was not the center of attention. He was standing with the crew from Site 4. He was holding a plastic cup of cheap beer, listening to an old pipe fitter tell a story. Marcus laughed. It was a real laugh. It came from his chest, not his throat. He noticed me watching him. He raised his cup in a small, respectful salute. Then, he went back to his conversation. He was not sitting at the head table. There was no head table. We were all eating off paper plates on plywood tables, set up on sawhorses. I walked down the metal stairs. The heavy clang of my boots on the grating silenced the room. I did not need to tap a glass. The respect in this room was earned, not demanded. I walked to the microphone stand we had set up in front of the old lathe machine, the very first machine Sarah and I had bought in 1979. "Good evening, everyone," I said. A cheer went up. It was rough and loud. "Thank you," I said, raising a hand. I looked at the faces in the crowd. A year ago, I stood in a ballroom and watched this company almost die. We were rotting from the inside out. We thought that success was measured in stock prices and magazine covers. We forgot that success in our business is measured in one thing only. Does the structure hold? I paused. In engineering, we talk about load-bearing structures, columns, beams, foundations. These are the parts of the building that carry the weight. They do not get the glory. They get covered up with drywall and paint. But if they fail, the whole thing comes down. I looked directly at the back of the room, toward Marcus. People are the same, parents, mentors, leaders. We are the load-bearing structures for the people we love. We carry their weight. We absorb their stress. We let them build their lives on top of our sacrifices. I took a deep breath. But there is a law in physics. Every material has a breaking point. When the load becomes too heavy, when the stress becomes toxic, the structure has to protect itself. I gripped the microphone stand. For a long time, I thought that loving someone meant letting them crush you. I thought loyalty meant staying silent while the foundation cracked. I was wrong. There was total silence in the workshop. Even the hum of the ventilation fans seemed to fade. True survival is not about enduring abuse, I said. It is about self-preservation. It is about knowing that you have the right to reinforce your own walls. You have the right to say no more. You have the right to inspect the load and reject it if it is poisonous. That is not selfishness. That is structural integrity. I saw Marcus look down at his boots. He understood. I smiled, and the tension in the room broke. But enough philosophy. We are here to talk about the future. I picked up a folder from the lathe. When Sarah passed away, she wanted Iron Core to be a legacy. She wanted it to take care of the people who built it. For the last year, I have been working with the legal team to restructure the ownership of this company. I opened the folder. Effective immediately. I am transferring 100% of my equity in Iron Core Dynamics into the Sarah Smith Employee Ownership Trust. A gasp rippled through the room. That means I do not own this company anymore, I said. You do. Every single one of you. From the foreman to the newest apprentice. The profits are yours. The decisions are yours. You are the shareholders now. The room exploded. People were screaming, crying, hugging each other. It was the sound of 300 lives changing in an instant. I looked at Marcus again. He was not cheering, but he was not angry either. He knew what this meant. He was the son of the founder. By all rights of tradition, that equity should have been his inheritance. It would have made him a billionaire. But he stood there, clapping slowly. He looked at me, and he nodded. A curt, sharp nod. He understood. He had lost his inheritance, but he had found his hands. He was making $18.50 an hour. And for the first time in his life, he could sleep at night because he knew he was worth exactly $18.50. He was no longer a fraud. I stepped away from the microphone. I did not stay for the backslapping or the champagne. This was their night. Not mine. My work was done. The inspection was complete. The remediation was finished. The structure was sound. I walked out the side door into the cool night air. My truck was waiting. The same old Ford F-150. It had a few more miles on it now, and the suspension was a little softer, but it started on the first turn of the key. I drove home. I did not drive to a mansion. I did not buy back the estate. I let the new owners have it. I hoped they enjoyed the yoga studio. I drove to my apartment complex. It was quiet. The gravel in the parking lot crunched under my tires, a sound that used to make me sad, but now sounded like victory. I climbed the stairs to Unit 2B. I didn't have to jiggle the key anymore. I had finally fixed the lock with a little graphite powder. Inside, the apartment was warm. I had bought a few things: a better chair, a rug, a new frame for Sarah's picture. I went to the kitchen. On the counter sat a thick ribeye steak I had bought from the butcher down the street. It wasn't Wagyu. It wasn't wrapped in gold leaf. It was just a good, honest piece of meat. I heated up my cast iron skillet. I listened to the hiss of the butter as it hit the hot metal. I seasoned the steak with salt and pepper. Nothing fancy. I cooked it to a perfect medium rare. I sat down at my small kitchen table. There was no jazz band. There were no investors whispering about market caps. There was just the hum of the refrigerator and the smell of seared beef. I poured myself a glass of red wine. I looked at the empty chair across from me. We did it. Sarah, I thought. We saved the name. I cut a piece of the steak. I looked at my reflection in the dark window glass. I saw an old man. My hair was white. My face was lined with the geography of a hard life. But my eyes were clear. My shoulders were light. I remembered Elena's voice, sharp and cruel. Cutting through the hotel lobby a year ago. Charity cases eat last. I smiled. It was a genuine smile. They say charity cases eat last. They say the old and the obsolete should wait for the scraps that fall from the table of the young and the hungry. But they forgot one thing. They forgot who built the table. They forgot who bought the food. And they forgot who holds the keys to the kitchen. The cook decides who eats. The builder decides who stays. I lifted the fork to my mouth. And tonight, I eat first. I took a bite. It was the best meal I had ever tasted. Thank you for listening to Robert's story. It was a long journey from the humiliation of that hotel buffet to the quiet dignity of his own kitchen. But it is a journey that reminds us all that our worth is not determined by the people who betray us, but by the strength of the foundation we build within ourselves. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Are you listening from a job site, from your car on the way home, or maybe from your own quiet kitchen? Leave a comment below and share your location and your thoughts on Robert's decision. Did he do the right thing by disinheriting Marcus? If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please subscribe to the Bittersweet Revenge channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who might need to be reminded of their own strength. Until next time, remember, keep your foundation strong and never let anyone tell you that you eat last.